So just as a way of introduction, I am the CEO of Newbigin Community Trust based in Winson Green and Handsworth. We run across 3 sites within the neighbourhood. So we're based out of a primary school. We run a big hub there, out of a church building on Lodge Road, where we run a day drop-in centre and social support, and out of a community house where we do a lot of our kids and youth programs. So we kind of spread right across the neighbourhood and have a broad view of intergenerational kind of issues. And then I'm also the chair of the primary care access subgroup for Flourish. So that's particularly the passion that we come to this with in terms of access for people from our neighbourhood to medical care. So Amy's asked me to share a little bit about some of our stories of patients and the things we've been dealing with. And I guess the background would really be helpful for people, although you may know this already. But in the last 3 years, Winson Green has changed. Winson Green, Handsworth and other parts around us has had a massive housing change, which has impacted our local GPs greatly. So what were family homes that would maybe have a mum and 3 children living in them, or a family, are now many of them have become houses of multiple occupancy and HMO and supported accommodation. So in 2018, we had a meeting with the local police and the local authority around trying to limit the amount of these properties, because in the 13 streets around Newbigin House, which is the base of our charity, there was 89 beds for single chaotic adults. So these are adults typically coming out of prison with multiple complex needs, people who found themselves homeless, being rehoused. So we said, look, we love that. We want to support these people. It's a lot of what we do in our charity, but that's enough for 13 streets. And over lockdown and leading into lockdown, we've now seen that number go to, I think as of about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there's 397 beds for single chaotic adults in those same 13 streets. So there's been a proliferation of this housing. So what that means for our local GP services is a constant flow of people moving in, maybe only staying for 2 or 3 weeks, having multiple contacts with A&E, mental health crisis teams, all sorts of connections with the NHS, and then often being moved on to another area because the style of housing is unsustainable, and often there's big fights and the police have to move people on, a lot of antisocial behaviour. So a lot of what we've found ourselves doing is trying to create access for these folk to GPs to get health services, and particularly preventative health services. So an example I can give, and I think Joy might have the slide. I did send a picture, but it's probably a bit late. So we have a guy, Dave, he's quite well known, housed in HMO in our community, but quite stable. He's 64. And Dave is a bit of a drinker, but generally not too antisocial, comes to the drop-in centre every day. And we noticed over a period of weeks he stopped being able to walk, and he would be found on the road sitting down, an ambulance would be called, he would go into hospital, come back out, he'd get aggressive with the staff. And one day we were cutting somebody's toenails here, an elderly gentleman who has arthritis and can't cut their own toenails. And that's no longer a free service on the NHS, and our folk can't afford the fee for a podiatrist. And so we thought, well, we'll soak Dave's feet, and the most horrendous ingrown, triple twisted toenails. And we discovered the reason he couldn't walk a lot of the time and was falling over was not because he was drunk, but actually because his toenails had never been cut in about 7 years. Now, he in that time's had quite a few hospital admissions, and yet no one had noticed this. So we were able to cut the toenails. Since then, we've developed a program where we found a college on the Hagley Road where they train podiatrists and chiropodists, and we take about 12 patients at the moment there on a monthly basis to have their toes done, and they charge us $5 for each patient. And so that's helped us see, particularly for our diabetic patients, that there's quite a bit of preventative work we can do for our unkept men. So that's just one example. Another example that we've been working with recently is a family that have a 4-year-old child who's waiting for an autism assessment. It's fairly extreme special needs behaviour the child has, and you know, non-verbal, very physically active, and the family have been trying to manage the child at home while they're on this never-ending waiting list for an assessment. And they're in a tiny little property. We can't get their property moved because we can't do that without the assessment. So they're stuck there. So Mum had put a child gate there, and then Children's Services were called because that people had noticed there were bruising on the child, but that's because he slams himself against the child gate trying to get out of the house. So the property is really inappropriate for the child. The parents are of Eritrean descent and so struggle to communicate, but are incredibly frustrated, waiting on this waiting list, keep coming back to us, you know, with this letter. And then they also were telling us the child couldn't breathe, and they've actually called an ambulance out, and police and ambulance, everyone came kicking the doors in thinking the child had died. And actually the child has some kind of sleep apnea, and what they meant by couldn't breathe is struggling to breathe, is, you know, he wheezes and stops breathing and wakes him up and so forth, but they weren't able to communicate that. Now that family, I think we see on the mind map, had something like 11 trips to A&E just this year. 1 ambulance. We've had about 3 Children's Services appointments. They see me a lot because I try to reinterpret the kind of what's going on, and incredibly frustrated. And because what we would normally try to do is help them get some schooling for the child and appropriate housing, it's all being held up because of this incredibly long waiting list. We had some success where we were able to fast track them to Bacchus Road Children's Centre for what we thought was the assessment, only to find out that was the referral to have the assessment, and now they've got on the 2-year waiting list. So that was the normal waiting list that you would wait up to 16 weeks, I think it is, and you'd get an assessment from another a specialist to say, yes, they need to go on the waiting list. So it did occur to us that as social workers and people in the community that perhaps we could have bypassed this first 8-month wait if we as a charity would be able to make that initial referral instead of having to go to the GP to then wait to then. And so we're also a lot cheaper. We don't need, you know, it probably is something the preschool and ourselves could have actually made that referral. So just trying to understand the system's been important to us around access. And then the third case, I guess, that we've looked at is just the amount of contact that people have with services. So we did these maps to kind of show when somebody comes into this area and what's happening in Birmingham, because there's such a proliferation of these HMOs, there's only about a 46% occupancy. So these organisations who have promised landlords this huge money. So what happens is a 3-bedroom house could be rented on a council housing benefit for about £670 a month, I think it is the LHA rate. If the landlord gives that house to an HMO, they get about £3,500 a month for that property. So landlords rush to give these properties to registered housing organisations to put these kind of single chaotic folk in. But of course, they can't fill them because there's not 21,000 people in that category in this area. So what happens is anybody from all over the country who needs housing is being brought to Birmingham. So we are picking up high needs, multiple complex folk from right over the country. So the last 25 people we housed here, because we just refer them then to these services, they come to our drop-in centre, they're homeless, have all come from places such as Liverpool, Wales, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield. And so Birmingham is bringing in, so the impact on our GP services, which were already struggling in a place like Ladywood where we don't have many older people and we have a very young population, so the financial figures don't stack up for the GPs to have enough hours, is now quadrupled by the fact that they're getting loads of these folk coming in. So this young lad came in and within 2 weeks, I think we worked out he had something like, did you count them, Rachel, didn't you?
2 mental health team contacts, 3 A&E contacts, 3 GP contacts, 1 pharmacy and 1 walk-in, plus lots of with us supporting.
Yeah, daily with us. And that was all around the fact he couldn't get his antipsychotic medication because there was a hold up in transferring getting him registered on a GP. Now we got it all sorted out. We finally got him stabilised. And because of the sort of housing it is, there was a fight within the house. and he's been moved on, and now he's starting all over again in Erdington. So I say he's been going to Heartlands or Good Hope, and it's all happening again because obviously the script is not following him to where he goes. So it got us thinking about how can we as the charity sector and the community sector take some of the pressure off the local services. And we came up with a few things as part of the Flourish subgroup. And one of the things we looked at is what are the jobs that GPs currently are being asked to do that are not medical in nature and that GPs shouldn't have to do. And they're being forced to do them as all of the other early help services and preventative services have been shut over the last 8 years, and more has fallen to the medical sector. And things like writing housing letters, writing proof of address, all of those things, we're like, surely that could be farmed out to the charity sector, because especially with the NHS app people can download, we could help people download it, we could actually see they're registered as a GP, and then we could write the letter. And then at, £12 an hour, we're way cheaper than a GP. And then the GPs would be freed up to spend more time doing what they're good at, which is the medical stuff. The other thing that we do a lot of is keeping track of people's medication. So we know when certain people are due to run out of medication, and we try to go round to their house, we find them, we ring the doctor, get an appointment. Because since COVID, particularly, not being able to walk into your GP, and the way it's got much more complicated, people don't have the sort of phones that they have, the little drug dealer phones, not the smartphones. So they can't do a video call, they can't upload a photo of the particular skin rash they've got. So they'll come in and do a lot of that with us. But we often find that once we go with them, we actually get to be able to see the GP face to face, because they behave better, they get better treatment, and we can then explain to them, because they're often very, very stressed and hostile to the system because they've had bad experiences or they're not confident, and then they don't listen properly and they get it all confused. We had a guy who thought he'd been told he had lung cancer, so we're all very sad for him, and nothing they could do, and I managed to help him follow up and go into that appointment. It wasn't that at all. He just got totally confused, and there was something on the lungs. They took an image, it was some scarring from TB as a child, but so we found that we've been able to prevent a lot of things by doing this. But what we're now looking at is how can we make it better for our local services, and then also for our local people. And a lot of it's around managing prescriptions. So we were thinking that if we could have a nurse prescriber somewhere based in the community somewhere, then for a little bit like the Homeless Health Exchange, where people who don't have an address and they can go to the Homeless Health Exchange, where we could take maybe 1,500 of the most chaotic patients off the local GPs in this area that's heavily HMO'd, just for their script management. And they do that with their housing support worker or with the charity like ourselves. That would free up so many more GP appointments for people needing to get medical attention. So that was one thing. The other thing is that we identified, I think, in our subgroup, 10 things that GPs currently do that they shouldn't really have to do, which is around letter writing and proof of ID and things like that. Another thing we've discovered since lockdown, we were taking a lot of these older guys for hearing tests just at Specsavers. Once a year I make sure I take 5 or 6 of the older unkept guys to get their eyes done, get them some glasses and get their hearing. Since lockdown, you now need a GP referral for the audiologist. So we're at Specsavers. So this is a service the GPs are already overrun, and now they've introduced this new thing for GPs to do, which seems crazy. The audiologist at Specsavers in the city centre was sitting there doing nothing, and I had the guys with me. We've got the glasses, we've done all of that, and we said, look, we tried to book our hearing test, but we couldn't book, and they said, no, you need a GP referral. None of those guys have yet secured a GP referral, because even over the phone we can't get it, because she said, oh, you just need to ring up and they'll send it to us. All of the GPs are insisting they need an appointment, then the guys don't show up at their appointment if I don't take them. And so you've got people whose hearing could be improved, which improves their quality of life and their social engagement and their mental health, but because of this new process, it flabbergasts me. But anyway, that's just a few of our woes. But on the bright side, we feel like there's real hope and there's real working together across the city. And I feel like this is a moment to be looking at new things, and there's a lot of will. And we've already seen a lot of creativity happening that's been able to help some of our folk. We have a guy who's been waiting a very long time for a knee.
Anji, yeah. Can I just interrupt you there? Sorry, before you go on again. Just conscious of time, I just wanted to give people an opportunity to ask you stuff. So Angie, really helpful and valuable. Any comments, questions for Angie? Lisa.
Angie, hi. Nice to meet you. I'm Lisa Maxfield. I'm Associate Director for Primary Care at BSOL CCG. So it's really interesting to hear what's been going on and your views today. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's a real shame, Jonathan, that none of the GPs are here today, because it would have been a real opportunity to have that conversation with general practice. I wonder whether going forward it might be, and I suppose my question is, have you had any connection with general practice so far, and do you need us to help you connect up in any way, shape or form? That's something that Ian and I can do, and perhaps potentially, you know, a conversation at the GP collaborative might be worth a conversation. I can see perhaps Darren's going to come in, but just wondered if you need some support really, Angie, and any help in connecting you up.
We have had some good connection with GPs, and we've got a couple of GPs as part of our subgroup. And Rachel here is about to do a survey. One of the big things we found with the GP practices is the variation in how you enrol. And we were looking at trying to do a big sort of social sort of survey to put something out for our community to say, if you go to this GP practice, you need this and you need to do it this way. So just demystify it so people don't get aggressive and angry and upset when they get there and find out they don't have the right documents. And we went to one GP practice to enrol, and you have to go home and fax your document, email your documents to them because they didn't have a printer or a photocopier. So we've solved that problem. We've got them one now. And because that's just something that most of our community are not going to be able to do. And so Rachel's about to do that. And we want to publish kind of like a little, like our own Yelp for the neighbourhood, and also big up the GPs. There's been some brilliant GP experiences that, you know, there's a GP that's absolutely brilliant with our guys who are a bit messy and drunk. There's another GP that's much better with children and mums than others have been. So we want to kind of highlight that. So when we've got a family that can choose, that's great. The big issue we're having is when people move literally 2 streets away, they're suddenly under another GP, and these guys, a lot of even our families are in hotels and hostels, because all of those homes that these guys are in were family homes. So we have 5,000 families, I think, in B&Bs and hotels and temporary accommodation, because there's no houses to rent, because they're all being given to the HMO sector. So we're doing a piece with the council trying to stop that, and with the federal government as well. But thank you.
So sorry, just on the, sorry, Jonathan, just as a supplementary question to that. So Angie, the piece of work that you talked about in, freeing up the 10 things with general practice, if you had a conversation collectively across West Birmingham with general practice about how that potentially could work. Okay, so we
identified those. We've been talking to 1 or 2 GPs to identify what those are.
Okay.
That's
so
been
Lisa, I think you're heading to this, but can I suggest an action to do that, to connect Angie into that GP group? Francesca, if you're happy to record that action. Lisa, are you happy to take that and make that one happen? Brilliant.
And I think the next step for that, we need connection with Home Office and also DWP, because they're the people requiring these letters. And there's a bit of will at the DWP. Haven't got anywhere with the Home Office, but that's another story.
Angie, I'm afraid we can't help you with those 2, but we can connect you to the GP leaders.
Start with the GPs, and then we take what the GPs are happy for us to present to those particular services. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great to capture that. Darren, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. So I had the pleasure of hearing you at the SWV Trust Board a couple of weeks ago. So I think we're still due for a meet at some point. What you presented here and what you presented there for me are the core of the model for community work. It's absolutely making those connections count, making the opportunities, and delivering a service that's truly first point of contact, rather than waiting for kind of primary care in the sense that we all describe it, which is general practice. So really, kind of, and I know you have this commitment from a trust board perspective, but it's just reinforcing it here really, is that really committed to A, working with you, B, unlocking the doors that you reference in your conversation, and then C, when we can pick up these small snippets of changes that you've made in the stories that you've given, look at the opportunity to grow them much bigger, because at the minute we all run after what we know, rather than being opportunistic and looking at the stuff that other people have done, like yourselves and your organisation. and then growing that from there. And for me, if there's one thing that I get left with after listening to yourself twice now and other organisations, is that the presence of local partnerships means that we can make these very small changes to have a big effect, as opposed to if you create these massive organisations with big superstructures, you often lose that local relationship, and it's the local relationship that makes that difference. So really well done. I'm really impressed, and definitely want to spend some time with you.
Thanks.
Darren, thank you. Any others for Anji?